Well, I'm excited tonight to hear from Emily. Amen. And she's getting goosed out of her chair. But no, you know, Emily was greatly impacted in Brazil, and I felt like she had something. And tonight, it's not just her saying, "This is what I did in Brazil," right? No, it's carrying something that is the heart of the Father that needs to be imparted and released to us. So let's just welcome Emily Rudd as she comes. Amen. Doug, Doug, Goose.
Trying to think if I want to give words first. I wasn't planning on giving words, but in worship, God just kept highlighting people to me. Diana, you're just so highlighted to me, and I saw this for you, but for your family as well. I saw the word courage over you, but it's not the courage that you usually see, the courage that's obvious, and we think of bravery and courage of like beating up lions or something, but it's the courage and it's the bravery in those quiet places and those quiet decisions that you make, and they're not less valiant, they're not less brave just because they weren't noticed and they didn't get applause. And so I see that over you. Enjoy during worship. God just kept highlighting you to me, and I looked at you and I had a memory of years ago in the other building. You shared something in service about having an encounter and seeing these doors in your encounter, and I remember going up to you and like, I've been there, and I've seen the same things that you've seen, and I believe that God is going to take you back to some of the old places, the old secret places, places in the spirit, and you're actually probably going to have to like schedule time to even have just those quiet moments with him because life gets so crazy, and you'll just have to be like, no, I'm going to set this time aside just to be with him. And it's not anything to share with others. It's just another way he wants to connect. And I know you already do this, but he's really wanting you to step into a season of, even in worship, just encountering him more in the spirit realm and in the secret place. So it's good to be back. I've been back a week and a half, maybe almost a week and a half. I'm going to kind of preach, talk. Um, really, well, I guess I should explain where I was at. I was at an art and worship school in Brazil, um, and what I received so many things, but what I expected to receive the most, it it wasn't what I expected. What I received the most wasn't what I expected. I I thought I'd be practically trained kind of in the arts, but uh, I thought I'd be more practically trained, but really God gave me more of a foundation of creating for an audience of one, and that's what the core of the school was. But even more than that, it really ignited uh, that heart for the nations and that call for the nations in me, which happens when you go to another country. I was the only American there, and there was another Colombian in the school. So I really want to focus on the heart of the nations tonight. I really want to focus on. Uh, I don't have a title, really, but I feel like we all know that this church is really linked into the nations. We've always been linked into the nations, and I feel like tonight, certain people are gonna get touched and get tapped on the head of and get those dreams and those promises of the nations. It's gonna wake up in you. So I'm just gonna pray. So God, I thank you for what I received in Brazil. I thank you for those things. God, I received so much for the nations. God, everyone's called to the nations. And God, I thank you that you would reveal the one to us. You would reveal those people to us. God, I just ask that you would reveal the faces of the ones that we're called to. You would reveal that tonight, even in the service. It's not about my words. It's not about what I really say, but it's about what God's doing. And so I could be saying whatever, and God is going to start showing you things, telling you things, and pressing on your heart. So God, just come further with that. Come further with that, Jesus. Amen. All right, so having a nation's call or being called to the nations, I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about some of the things I feel like we need to know as a people that are called to that. And I'm going to go ahead and give credit to some of the speakers. They spoke and gave these messages, and I took bits and pieces that I learned. So there's a couple, Jeremiah and Courtney Bowser. That's who I'm sharing a lot from, and then Nick and Rachel Billman, whose ministry I was at. And so sometimes when we hear, oh, we are called to the nations. When I was a little girl and heard that, like living in Japan, I was like, what does that mean? And when someone would say that, I would just get a visual of like a map in a certain country or continent, and it's like, oh, I'm called to that spot. I'm called to here. But that's not what being called to the nations is, because you aren't called to a place. You aren't called to a church. We're not called to buildings, but we're called to people. It's not just a nation. It's not just an area. You're called to people. And I want to clarify one thing. You don't just have to go to another nation to be called to the nations. You can be in America, you can be in your town, and you can be called there. And so I want to look at Matthew 28:19 through 20. You don't have to turn there. I'm just going to say it fast. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. So we know that verse. Any of these kids from school could have said it for me. But my point is, it says, Jesus talking to the disciples, go and make disciples of all the nations. Are we disciples as Christians? Do we follow Jesus? Yes. So our job is to go into the nations and make disciples of them. So that's every single person in this room. And that looks different. Maybe sometimes we think, oh, I'm called to the nations, so I need to go live in a grass hut in Africa and be dirty. And maybe he will call you to that, but maybe he will call you to Ardmore. Maybe he'll call you to Medill. Maybe he'll call you to Australia and you go maybe 3 times out of the year. Maybe you're called permanently. It looks different for everyone. And sometimes we think, I don't know. So, but my point is, we're called to a people. We're not called to a place, and we have to understand that, because sometimes I hear people say this, well, I'm called to this country. Or the big one is, I'm called to Africa. Why? Why are you called? Because I want to be like I think. Why? Can't answer it. Because they don't realize being called to a nation isn't a literal place, but it's a people. And they don't understand the value in the one. And what I want to talk about is this guy, Jeremiah Bowser, talked about value in the one, and I'll explain that further. But let me tell you the story of when I heard this in the service I was in. I think it was the second week of the school, and this guy was the first American speaker. And so I had been like having all of my things translated, or having a little earpiece and someone else translating in the service. And so this guy was like, does anyone speak English? And I was like, we're best friends. And so now all the Portuguese speakers had to wait their turn, and I got first dibs, so it was really cool. Um, but before this guy spoke, he's actually a worship leader, and he's worshiping. He'll sing some in English, mainly Portuguese, um, and I'm just like getting so wrecked, and I'm crying, and God keeps showing me these things, these different things, and He keeps showing me these different faces of different children in different countries, in specific areas and specific locations. Like one was here at a football game, 3 were in this house, and I saw Jesus sitting with them. And then others were in this other country. And I paid really close attention to these faces that he was showing me because I knew they were for a reason, they're for a purpose, they're keys, and I need to remember these faces because I know I'm going to see them again. And so Jeremiah comes up afterwards and he begins speaking about the value in one, the value in just one person. And sometimes we think of missions and those things and going to the nations as having a huge ministry and touching all these people. But what if it was just for one person? What if it was just for one person? Let's say God says, go to India, and that's all he says. And so you go to India. That's a lot of money, a lot of time. And he shows you a picture of one person. This guy in an orange turban and a white beard. I'm quoting a Darren Wilson movie. Todd White. Okay, we're going to go to this place, and lo and behold, there's this guy, and he's there. And he's like, oh, I saw you in a dream. And he gives his life to Jesus, and he's like the top guru. That was just for the one. That was just for the one. I want to look at Luke 15. And I'm going to just read, we know the story, but I'm going to read it. Luke 15, 1 through 7. Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So he spoke this parable, saying, what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. And then here's the part that I want us to focus on. I say to you that likewise, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. And so just one person, it could be a few seconds, a few minutes, knowing God a little bit more, encountering God, giving their life to Jesus, whatever that looks like, that encounter, all of heaven rejoices over the one, the same as many. And that doesn't make sense to how the world measures success, because heaven measures success on a different scale. Heaven measures just by one, there's rejoicing. The world, it's tied to numbers. Our success is built on comparison in numbers, and a lot of that is because of social media. But even before social media, I think the church kind of was the cause of that, because of before that, really, we're gonna stretch our tents and we're gonna count all the salvations and maybe lie about a few hundred. And I think it might have started with the church, honestly. But anyways, so when you live by how heaven measures success, when you live in that way, and you ignore how the world measures, oftentimes there's rejection and there's misunderstanding. And I want to talk about that because if we have a heart for missions, if we have the heart for the nations, we need to understand that rejection and misunderstanding is bound to happen in many ways, but we can't let it stop our call, and we can't let it become unforgiveness and go into our hearts. So we have to learn how to forgive these things. But talking about rejection, because when you have a worldview, when you're focused on the nations and not just like Ardmore, Oklahoma is as big as it's gonna get, this is my life. When you focus on the world, you're open minded, um, and you have your big picture oriented. But then that also means there are small minded people that don't understand that. I've heard people say, well, why would you want to go to Brazil? Was it not good enough here for you? Right? Ever heard that? Yeah. But we have to get out and we have to experience those different cultures. We have to experience those different things because many times the nations are just a concept for us. It's just a place. It's not a people until we go and we see the brokenness. We experience the different cultures. So many times we pray and we pray and we pray, but we don't know what we're even praying for. And so I personally feel like everyone should go to a different country at some point in their life, especially because we're all intercessors. We all need to pray for these things. So that's one reason why you should. But with closed minded people, and I'm not saying that to be like, oh, we're so smart and our view is so amazing. And no, you just got a revelation from someone else that led you here. So you can share that revelation with others, and they can either decide, and get curious about other cultures of travel. It doesn't even have to be missions, it still uh, widens your view. Or they can not do that because of the familiar. The familiar is comfortable, but oftentimes the familiar is a liar and it keeps you in the same place and you can't grow. So there's that kind of rejection on kind of this side of things, but we can't let that affect us. Um, but there's also misunderstanding and rejection on the other side when you actually get to the country, because misunderstanding happens when you don't know the language, um, in just cultural differences. And so I'll give example. I'll tell a story. I There was a lot of misunderstanding at first for me. And that was okay because I was in a safe place with safe people and we understood that there would be misunderstanding. We were okay. Like, we're just trying to talk to each other and we're like, hey, do you know what this word means? Do you know, how do you say this in English? Every conversation. And so we could misunderstand each other, but still understand the misunderstanding. So that's not really the side of rejection because I was in a safe place. We were all there for the same thing, all same beliefs. Like, it's all good. But the third week, the beginning of the third week was when I was like, oh, I want to go. I miss church. I just want to be at church instead of the mall. But it was weird. Just being honest. But I was getting really frustrated, and I sometimes things will get on you and it's not really you. Sometimes you'll start feeling a certain way. You're like, God, why do I feel this way? This isn't me. Well, that was starting to happen, and I was starting to get frustrated because people were still treating me like the American baby that couldn't walk outside by herself or go or eat by herself or do anything by herself. And so I ended up hiding, or not internally, but in my room, away from people because they wouldn't leave me alone. Like, I just need to talk to Jesus. Please go away. The scupa. But so I was getting like really frustrated. Like, am I just completely useless? And am I just a baby, like a weak baby? And people would prophesy, you need to be stronger, you need to be stronger, you need to be braver. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're saying that just because I don't scream in the service. So, because Brazilians worship loud, they're like, we're waiting for you to scream. Like, Jesus isn't deaf. That's what Nick Billman says. There's nothing wrong with screaming in church, only sometimes. But I was getting really frustrated and just assuming different things and frustrated with myself. And we had service that night, and Courtney Bowser spoke. But in worship, we had open doors, and it was filled with people. And in worship, I'm standing like this with both my hands like that, and I'm froze. Like my whole body is just frozen. It's like, God, what? And usually when he freezes you, he really wants you to pay attention. That's what my interpretation of that. But he starts talking to me. It's like, why do you care what they think? Why do you care? They don't have to understand. They don't have to understand. I understand. It's okay. They don't have to understand. It's like, yes, God, okay. And so I was still frozen in one hand for the rest of the service, but he let me go. And so that's kind of my own rejection on that side of things, just because of the cultural differences. And the most successful person, like Jesus was pretty successful, but he was rejected until they killed him. So rejection happens. But the thing is, one thing God told me while I was frozen there, he's like, it doesn't matter what they think, because you're living for me. You're not living for them. You're living for an audience of one. And Jesus didn't live for the crowds. He didn't live for that. He lived for his Father, for the audience of one. And so rejection doesn't matter. And if we can't live for an audience of one, if we don't have that foundation, which is really what the school put in me, because artists want to compare, and they want to, if someone doesn't like your work as an artist, that's like failure in the worldly success. But it's not. Anyways. But if we can't live for an audience of one, we'll never understand the value of that one person. We'll see the face, but we won't understand the value. And we'll keep seeing nations as glorified, self-glorified titles of, I want to be a martyr, but you never go. Well, why? What is it for? Is it so you can be a martyr, or is it for something? So how to live for an audience of one? Because why would you live for an audience of one if you don't know him? And that's when intimacy with God in the secret place comes in. And this is so important, I think, if you ever do missions or go to the nations, because try going and not having intimacy with God and not knowing how to hear his voice and not being with him. It's not fun. You have to rely on him. And in the church sometimes, or in America, we like get lazy and we don't have to do it. But when you're doing missions, you have to. And so my hope is that in America we would actually live like that, not until we need it, but all the time. I'm just talking to myself personally. But so to live for an audience of one, we have to understand the secret place, and we have to understand intimacy with Jesus. Everything we do has to come out of that place of intimacy, because when we know him and we're in relationship with him, then we can live with the thought of we're just living for him, and then we can see the one. Then we can see our why. It's a person, it's not a place. So I want to look at Matthew 14. Matthew 14, 27, 31, 27 through 31. So this is when the disciples are out on the boat and it's storming and everything, and they look across the waters and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a ghost. And then Jesus is like, no, it's not, it's me. So, verse 27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it's you, will command me to come to you in the water. So he's like testing Jesus. Try me. He's like, Jesus is like, come on. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt? And so I'm not looking at this verse as, oh, Peter fell in the water. We all know Peter fell in the water. Peter's awesome. He's fine. But when Peter was in intimacy with God, it was when he was looking in his eyes, and he didn't even see the storm. He didn't even notice the storm. He just walked over it. And when you're in intimacy with God, you walk over the storm, because there's always going to be storms. No matter where you're at, the devil is always going to try to attack you and to distract you from your call, because your call is big. And so the bigger the distractions, usually you have to ask, what is he trying to distract me from? My call must be pretty big, you know? But intimacy with Jesus, that's what keeps you safe from the storm. It sounds really scary. Oh, the devil's always going to be after you. It doesn't matter as long as you're looking at his face, as long as you're seeing him and you're looking in his eyes. The storm doesn't matter. You're safe. And even when you look away and you're like, oh my gosh, that car wreck was really bad. Jesus, it doesn't disqualify you. He's still like, you're fine, you know. And so that brings me to my last point of fully giving yourself, fully surrendering yourself. Because if you really go to the nations and you're called and you do that thing, you have to give everything. You really do. And that has a lot to do with obedience, which isn't always fun in the beginning. It doesn't always make sense. Obedience doesn't always make sense. But Courtney Bowser says, it's not your job to understand, it's your job to obey. And so I want to give an example of obedience that didn't make sense while I was in Brazil. This happened a few times because we prophesied all the time. And can I just say, if you're going to go to the nations, if you're going to actually do this thing, what he's commissioning you to do, I would greatly encourage you. We have a ministry school here where I was already prepared for that. They taught us those things at the school, how to prophesy, how to hear the voice of God. They taught us those things, and most of those students have never heard that. But I was like, yeah, I've heard all of this, like word for word from my dad. So, like, this is just like a reminder, and this is really cool. But the second day I was there, our first activation was taught by Rachel Billman, and she's like a firecracker. She is so prophetic, it's scary. But she led this prophetic activation this night, and we were all like, they're all freaking out, like, we've never done this. And I'm like, I have, but I'm not telling you that, you know? And so some of the activations that they did were very similar to what we do in the school, but they're slightly different. I might take a while to tell this, but so like I probably prophesied over 20 people that night. But it was so funny what we did. So we get with a person, and I had a translator, and they would say, all right, we're going to give the name of an animal, and then you have to prophesy what that animal means to this person. I think this is kind of different, but okay. So they say something in Portuguese. And I'm like, what did they say? Horse. You only have 10 seconds now to prophesy. And so, but that teaches you how did you see that horse? Was it running? Was it carrying someone? What was it doing? So it teaches you to notice the details and how to prophesy. And so that happened, and probably did that with like 5 partners, and they did it back. And but then we decided to do something really crazy, and we're like, all right, we're gonna make a huge circle. So these people make a circle. We go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So all these people are like this. And then now the rest of you, the ones, are going to face those people. So there's a circle and then another circle. And so you're going to hold their hands, you're going to look in their eyes, and you're going to have 20 seconds to prophesy to them. And we're going to keep doing like the animal thing and the object thing. So they'll be like, spoon, and you have to be, you're a spoon, I saw you, and you transport things, and blah, 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 and So it's already weird. And so I'm on like my 15th person, and it's getting more weird. They're like, the first thing, which I went first every single time to who I prophesied to, which was fine. They say, the first thing you see in a car, and immediately I see a tissue box. I'm like, well, we're already being weird, and I only have 20 seconds, so I'm like, I see you as a tissue box. And people don't always know you're there until they need you. And they forget about you, and they forget your value until they really, really need you. But your Father, this is how I said your Father knows your value. He always knows where you are. He always knows your value. But the thing is, as soon as I said tissue box, this girl like starts crying. I'm like, oh, what does this mean? Which I didn't really have time to think about obeying. You have 20 seconds. And so later she comes and tells me, because I have to move on to the next person. Later she comes and tells me, my father abandoned me when I was very young, and I don't remember him. I didn't remember him. And I decided to go and find him, and I finally figured out where he was, and thought, when I meet him again, I'm going to give him a present. And so I made him like a little paper doll, and then I put it in a tissue box, and I gave it to him. And so she's like, I said, your father always knows where you are, and here she is, like that. And so obedience sometimes looks like calling someone a tissue box, and you don't know how it's going to look. But if I went just to say that to that girl, that was worth it to me. 20 seconds, lots of money, lots of planes. Not really, but I mean, it was a little bit of work. But if it was just for that, that was really cool. And that's what value in the one looks like. So to see these promises, of the nations and of the one, we have to be obedient. And giving yourself fully, we sing it, right? But that's just the first step. God, you can have it all. Beautiful surrender, it's all good, Jesus, you got it all. And then I'm frozen. This is the same encounter. I'm frozen, dealing with me about rejection and acceptance. And he's like, hey, can I have this? I'm like, you have me frozen, so am I gonna say no? Like, yes, you can have it. And it was painful. And that's not the first time he's asked me to give something or someone to him. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a job. It can be really anything. He can ask for anything. You can say yes or no. But just saying you can have it all, that's just the first step. And he's going to come in and ask you, can I have this? And you have to say yes or no. And so for missions, you have to let some things go. And I knew that if I didn't give that to him, I would never do the things that he was putting in my heart. I would never see those faces that he was showing me, and I would never do the call, fulfill the call, and pursue it if I didn't give it up. And I thought I'd given him everything, but then he reminds you what you haven't given. So I want to talk just one more thing about the last day I was there, which was so crazy. It was graduation night, and we graduate, we get our diplomas. They go Emily Rude, and Emily Rude comes up and gets her diploma and her book in Portuguese. And so Emily Rude was happy. But then we worshiped, and during worship, something so heavy started to hit me, and it could have. People were really emotional that night. I really wasn't. I was like, I'm ready to go home. I'll miss you all, but English, I miss you. But so I was in worship, and something so heavy fell on me for the nations. And Nick and Rachel were leading worship, and they're singing, "Son of Righteousness, oh, that song, but in Portuguese, so I knew the words. Um, but something fell so hard in me, and I'm just crying. And then Nick starts preaching, and I start crying even more. And he's talking about how the encounter is just the invitation. We have all these encounters and we have all these things happen to us on the floor, but that's just the asking. That's just like, can I have this? Are you gonna do this? Look, I'm giving you a hint. Now you have to go and find it. So the encounter is just the invitation. And so that was already wrecking me, and that's not my point. But he starts telling his story about how he was in the global school. How would I say that? The global school, global awakening school. Him and his wife he was doing it, and he had to go on a trip. He's like, I went to Brazil because I had to go on a trip with Randy. It was just a necessary thing. I didn't want to go to Brazil. Um, I thought if I was going to be a missionary anywhere, it was going to be someplace that I could die for my faith. Again, it's the thing of the title of the mission field. Um, but he got there, and he starts getting wrecked, and God knocks him out for 7 hours on the floor and tells him to move to Brazil. And he calls his wife, and she's like, I know. I saw a clock spin 7 times, so you're out 7 hours, and we're moving to Brazil, and that's it. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, it's my parents. And he's telling this story, but he didn't care for Brazil until he was there and until he saw the people. And he's on the bus, and the bus is driving, and he looks out to one of the areas where all the prostitutes are. And in the natural, he sees every prostitute with his daughter's face. And his daughter's probably like 6 years old at this time or something. And I don't remember the question God asked him at that time, but I'm sure it was like, who's going to do something about this? And Nick answered, I will. I'll do it. And so it doesn't become real. The nations are just a concept. And it's okay for it to be a promise at first, but we don't understand until we're face to face with a nation. And I went on a lot of outreaches with Shores. I've probably done like more missions work at this art school where I was being served than I have on other mission trips, because they just do so many outreaches, and like it works. It's good. It's not just, you guys understand, some people who have been on mission trips together. But what happened to me is I see the nation in the faces of these people. But what happened was I wasn't even on an outreach this day. It was the last week, and we got to go to this museum of Hasifi. And it was all about the history of Hasifi. And we're walking out, and we're in a popular place, and I'm a white person. I forget. And I have blue eyes. So 3 guys come up to me. They're like, talking in Portuguese and something. And all my friends who speak English back away from me and leave me alone with these guys. And so the guys from my team are like, hello, no Portuguese, like, go away. And suddenly, it lasted about 6 seconds, but this beautiful man, and I say beautiful because in Brazil, it's very popular for men to dress like women and just be very beautiful. But this man just comes up and he gives me this leaf that he's made into a rose. And he doesn't ask for money, he doesn't say anything. He just hands it to me, and we're looking in each other's eyes for maybe 2 seconds. And I just see the nation of Brazil, and I'm so heartbroken. And what was so funny before that is for that past week, God had kept showing me this one vision of just Jesus's eyes. And I didn't understand why, but I was so encountered by just looking in his eyes. And then this I saw this pretty boy, and he's looking at me, and it's the same look as Jesus has in his eyes. And that's when I realized this is the one. And I was so heartbroken and so touched. And I've never had an experience with a transvestite before. And suddenly they're not they're not just a people group, they're not just sinners or whatever, but they're a person, and the same love of God that loves me loves them the same. And I felt it, and I see Jesus looking back at me. And that's what the one looks like. And so tonight I want to pray for you guys, and you guys might want to help me. In a minute I will, and I'll pray and we'll dismiss. But if you have felt anything weigh on your heart, like, I know this wasn't the greatest message, but if you feel that weighing on your heart for a specific nation, or maybe you don't know, you just feel that calling, you just feel the weight. If you feel that, I want you to come up in a minute, not just yet. If you just felt God on you, maybe you've never felt called, but maybe tonight you felt something. And we're all called, right? But if you felt something specific tonight, and if you want further revelation of that, we're gonna come up, and after Nick spoke on graduation, the scariest and most powerful night of my life happened after that, because we moved all the chairs, turned the lights off, and he's like, I'm gonna pray for you, and some of you are going to be commissioned to the nations. Some of you are going to be temporarily and permanently commissioned to the nations. And he said, I'm going to pray for staff, but you can already receive. He starts praying for staff, and I fall. I just go on my knees, and there aren't any catchers. There aren't any catchers the whole time I was there. I just learned to fall on my knees. It's okay. And and God just mopped the floor with me. It was so scary, and I'm not going to go into it, because it's like, God, I don't have any control over my physical body. I'm literally screaming. This is scary, but it's the call of the nations. It marks people, and it's important. And I'm not trying to scare you with that story, and that might happen to you when we pray. It might be quiet. It might look like different things. But if you feel like this, if you feel this way about the nations, if you feel that call, if you want that passion, if you want to see the ones, then I want to pray for you guys. And you guys might need to help me. And we don't have a lot of catchers, so if you feel like you're gonna fall, just be like me and like lay down in your own puddle of snot and tears mixed with sand. It was really bad. And then I never went to sleep, and 3:30 went to the airport, and it was great. Anyways, so we're gonna do that. So I'm gonna pray, and like we'll dismiss, I guess, after I pray. But if you want that, come up. So, God, I just thank you for what you've deposited in me, God. God, you commissioned me. God, you imparted things in me. And tonight I just ask that you would do the same, and that you would fill this place, God. And one thing that Nick said before we prayed, before he even prayed over us, was raise your expectations. And all of these people, you could feel their expectations, because they came to this school for a reason. It wasn't because their parents dragged them there. They scraped every bit of money up. They believed. And that doesn't have to be different here. We can want it just as bad. So if you have great expectation, if you want to go to the nations, if you want to walk in that calling, this is for you tonight. God, I just ask that you would reveal the faces of the ones. God, you might not reveal that, but you might tell them where. You might give them a piece of the puzzle. You might give them that hint. God, you're just going to encounter us tonight. I believe that. I expect that of you. And you love it when we're excited and we expect things of you. Because you're just waiting for us to do that. You're excited that we're excited for you. So we're going to put on some music. We're going to pray. And no one has to pray for you to encounter him. That's what happened with me. No one had to pray for me. Right?